Hi, this is Barb Hammer, and I'm the Director of the Office of Disability Services here on the MU campus. And Gina has asked me to talk with you about Universal Design for Learning. I was happy to do this last spring semester, and we're going to try it again. See if I can cover things in a little bit more smooth way this time. You will have, by this time, I think, learned about the basic principles of universal design: equitable use, flexibility in use, simple and intuitive, perceptible information, tolerance for error, low physical effort, size and space for approach and use. Also, by now, you would understand that those were principles that were coined by an architect. They were architectural principles. But over time, those principles have been applied to many other things besides architecture, including the learning environment. And actually, Universal Design for Learning adds new principles, but I'll get to that. Let me just talk a little bit about UD just generally again, just to kind of refresh. When you think of universal design, you think about things, if you're thinking about your space around you, think of things like a zero-depth entry pool. For example, here at the rec complex or over in the Arc here in town. The post office, the electronic doors that they installed, are a great example of universal design. They were designed probably because of wheelchair access, but if you think about people going into post offices with their arms full of packages, going in or out, people with baby strollers, you know, carts, so on, it made a huge difference for people of all walks of life to be able to get in and out of that building. Text paging systems. Originally, texting was designed for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, and now everybody uses texting. Voice-activated word processing systems. Again, they were originally designed to work for people whose dexterity wasn't sufficient to be able to type things out, but now lots of people use it because of the efficiency that's involved. Captioning is another great example of a way to design something to address the different principles of universal design. Think of it, airports, the people movers, the walkways that go through airports. Instead of having to, walk, you've got the little walkways that can carry you, so you can either go on your own 2 feet or stand there and let it carry you itself. So I won't spend a lot of time talking about universal design in general, but that gives you, again, kind of gets you into that mindset of what it is. Let's add 2 new principles to the list of universal design, make it universal design for learning: community of learners and an instructional climate. So what do we mean by that? Well, before we even talk about that, let's look at another way of thinking of universal design for learning. If you are teaching a class, if you are trying to convey information to people, it makes sense that you would do it in a way that addresses people's learning styles. Not everybody's going to learn in the same way in your classroom. So if you actually try to convey information in more than one way, you're going to be getting closer to providing that environment that addresses the needs of all of your learners. So another way of looking at universal design for learning is multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression, multiple means of engagement. I kind of like that better than the community of learners, instructional climate. So let's talk about these. Multiple means of representation basically means that you're delivering course content with flexible formats. You're kind of allowing students to sort of make adjustments to how they're learning the information in the classroom as they're working through the material throughout the whole course. You offer a choice of different materials and how they access those materials. When you're talking about action and expression, you're actually offering a variety of different ways for students to respond to the content. So when you are testing their acquisition of knowledge, how are you asking them to do that? Is it always a 50-minute multiple choice test? If so, why? I mean, is it because you have a 50-minute class? Are there other ways of having them do things? Projects, group projects, papers. I mean, there could be a whole host of different ways. And if you're doing a mix of those, you're probably, again, going to be getting closer to capturing what the students really have learned and offering them opportunities to show that. And it goes back to that whole idea, which we talk about in disability services, which is students with disabilities. The disability is really not the issue. The issue is the environment in which that student is interacting and the way we have designed the courses, the buildings, the environment, and the barriers that have been presented as a result of that design. So keep thinking about that. Multiple means of engagement, I think, is probably pretty self-explanatory. Really, it's involving what do you do in the classroom, how do you get people engaged in the learning process. Let me read to you a couple of things. These come from Universal Design for Learning Guidelines from CAST. Learning is impossible if information is imperceptible to the learner and difficult when information is presented in formats that require extraordinary effort or assistance. Something to think about. How about this? The purpose of education is not to make information accessible, but rather to teach learners how to transform accessible information into usable knowledge. I like those quotes. I think they're worth just thinking about. So how do you do this? Well, as I've been talking about, there's a whole host of different things. If you go back to that whole class climate thing, creating a kind of an inclusive environment, one of the things that we do in disability services is recommend to faculty that they include a statement in their syllabus. It's not a required statement, and the old way of doing business was that an instructor would put a statement in there that says, if you have special needs under the ADA, let me know, and we'll make sure that you get your accommodations. It would be something simple like that. We've shifted the focus of that because what we want is for faculty to understand that what they're doing in their classroom makes a big difference as to that student's ability to access the information they're presenting. So what we recommend that a professor put into a syllabus actually says, if you anticipate barriers related to the format or the requirements of this course, if you have emergency medical information to share, or if you need to make arrangements in case the building must be evacuated, please let me know as soon as possible. If disability-related accommodations are necessary, for example, a note taker, extended time on exams, or captioning, please register with Disability Services and notify me of your eligibility for reasonable accommodations. Flips the tables on it, and it basically puts the focus first on what have I done to make my class accessible for you, and if I've not done what's necessary, then we may need to provide some accommodations in some way. So what you're doing right off the bat is informing students that you want to make your learning environment welcoming and accessible to them. And you want them to tell you if there are barriers that don't, that present problems for them. One of the things that I would say that we always encourage in that syllabus statement is just making sure that you make yourself available to students, that you actually have office hours that are flexible and workable, so that students can get to you. Think about where you are and think about how accessible your office is for the students to get to you so that they can actually talk to you about the class. If you really want to be only communicated with by email and you have good reasons for that, that's cool. Just make sure they really understand that so that there's not a lot of confusion about that kind of process. The interactions that you have going on in the class, if you're giving students a sense right from the get-go as to what to expect in the class environment, it's going to make a big difference. Providing an agenda or some sort of a flow chart, something that helps them to know what to be focusing on. If you send things to them ahead of time, so that for a lot of students with learning difficulties, maybe attentional difficulties, if they can kind of plan ahead for the class and can understand, okay, this is what's going to be covered, I can sort of make sure I already have some notes in front of me. So as I'm following along as you're talking, that will help provide me with some structure. That's a good way to do it. Clear rubrics of what constitutes good work. Making sure students really do understand this is how you do, this is how you're going to show me that you've learned what you need to learn. This is one of my big ones. If you show any videos, if you have any kind of audio or any kind of media, make sure that it really is accessible to every student in the class. So if you are showing a video, make sure it's captioned, because you are going to have students in your class who will benefit from that multiple way of information being presented. Maybe they're not deaf, maybe they're not even hard of hearing, but maybe it's an international student and their first language is not English, and English is still a challenge for them at times. And so actually hearing a speaker and reading the captions at the same time can help drive in the information that's being presented in that video. Build in flexibility in your classroom. One of the things that we've been doing on campus is making sure that classrooms in some of your general classroom buildings like Strickland and A&S have furniture that allows students options, so that we don't just have those little desk chair combinations, so that's the only thing you can sit in, because you've got an awful lot of students who are not one size fits all, who are not going to fit well in those chairs. Students use scooters. Students who are large. Students who are really tiny, you know, and their feet don't touch the floor. Giving students different ways to be able to engage and interact and sit and be comfortable in the classroom, I think is huge. It's a big deal for me when I go to conferences. I'm very short, and most of those chairs they put in those meeting rooms, those are killers. You don't learn and you don't retain information if what you're doing is sitting there thinking about how bad your back hurts because your feet can't touch the floor. So that's the kind of stuff that people need to think about. If you have any control over your classroom environment, that's a huge thing you can do. Sometimes you don't, but then you have to sort of advocate for that. I think it makes sense that you're the person who's saying, look, this classroom doesn't work for my students. It doesn't work for me. Let's try to see what we can do to change that learning environment. There's a lot that you can do, and I'm sure Gina's going to be spending quite a bit of time in this course talking about how to actually present material, present information in the class. But anything that you're doing that helps to provide structure and support for the information that you're presenting, outlines, summaries, study guides, class notes, copies of materials, stuff that supplements what you're discussing so that they have, again, different ways of accessing the information in and outside of the classroom, I think makes a big difference for the learning process. I'm a big stickler about exams. It's been one of those things that for me, is the longer I do what I do, kind of makes me wonder why we have so many 50-minute exams that are multiple choice, and how difficult that is for so many students. And of course, the reason we have 50-minute multiple choice is because the class is 50 minutes long, and everybody seems to think that that's the best way to assess acquisition of knowledge. But there actually is a professor at University of Arizona who tested this and figured out that he could actually design an exam that was much shorter in length, 20 minutes, you know, maybe 25, that would tell him what he needed to know, that would help him to understand that the students have actually learned what he wanted them to learn. The professor at Arizona figured out that by writing an exam that lasts 20 to 25 minutes in length and actually gets at what he wants to know the students have learned. Students with disabilities who have as an accommodation for reasons of access a need to have extended time can take the exam in the class. They don't have to go someplace else. They can actually be with everyone else. They can have access to the professor and ask questions if they need to about what's going on with the exam. Huge. Makes a big difference. And I'm trying to convince faculty on this campus that I think that's a good thing to do. But it's a way to think about how are you measuring the students' acquisition of knowledge? How are you asking for feedback from the students? Finding alternative ways of doing that I think is really important. And of course I have to talk about technology because that's huge too. Making sure that whatever technology you're using, I mean I touched on the videos, but if you're using software, if you're using a course management system, make sure, test that, find out, is it accessible? Is it something that's designed to be accessible? Where are there some gaps? Where might be some barriers for some students in using those things? You're going to have a whole bunch of learners coming into your classroom who are going to come at different levels of knowledge and comfort when it comes to interacting with technology. I think a lot of us assume that students who come here to MU as freshmen are all totally tech savvy. I don't think that's true. And I think what happens is that we assume a lot about their ability to interact, and what we find out later is that some of the students are not even close to being prepared. And so being aware of that and being able to work with it instead of assuming it's all going to happen, it just keeps on rolling. Having some options for students I think is real important. So ultimately what happens is that you do all kinds of different things. You try to provide multiple ways for students to engage, to interact, to express their knowledge, and so on. But you still may run into situations where accommodations are necessary, and that's why our office exists. It's because we have to ensure that students still have the opportunity to learn and have the access to that information, and maybe even with best efforts at design, planning ahead and so on, there still may be a need to provide accommodations. I'll give you an example. you're teaching a class, you choose to use a textbook that's coming from some publisher, and we find out that textbook is not available in an electronic format that works for somebody who needs to use a screen reader. So we are going to have to reformat that textbook to make sure that the student can actually access that information. You deal with things that are going to be outside of your own control. And if that happens, it happens. And that's why the accommodations are there. You have to plan for those situations where the course design isn't going to address the need. And saying that, then you have to know how to arrange for those accommodations. You have to know where you go on your own campus, who you talk to, how to work with those people. And again, the more welcoming you can be to the students when you start your class, when you kind of set the tone at the very beginning, about ensuring that they know they can come to you and talk to you about these things, that you are open to working with them, that you want to ensure that they can be as much of a learner in your class as anyone else, you're going to be a long way ahead. And then you just tap into the resources that you have on campus, like our office, Disability Services, could be called a Disability Resource Center, it could be an Access Office, it goes by a lot of different names, but essentially you'd be wanting to make sure you know where we are. I think that probably covers it. I'm going to be meeting with all of you, I hope, in your class sometime soon, so I'll look forward to seeing you then. Bye.